Hello, this is David Lombardino, Editor-in-Chief of DLA Editors and Proofers, here today with part 4 of our series on how to nail a virtual video interview. And what I want to do today is talk about the different camera options that are available and really provide my advice on what to purchase. In previous videos, we've looked at the EOS Webcam software that Canon has provided and the different options that are available to use with that software. Of course, there's a full range of prices for those cameras, from just a few $100s to a few $1,000s. And what I want to do today is show you a few different options to kind of give you insight into which option to go for and whether actually spending more money on a camera is worth it. And of course, in the previous video, I did discuss about how to recoup most of the money that you use when you buy the camera and lens set up for your interview by selling it back. But of course, to get the money back from what you buy, you have to have that kind of budget in the beginning. And so what I want to cover today is whether it's worth spending a few $1,000s versus a few $100s on a camera system for your interviews. So I'm filming today I'm starting off with the EOS 5D Mark IV, which is kind of my go-to camera. I'm going to be comparing that, of course, to the regular laptop video cam or webcam so that you can get just a point of comparison there. And I've also got some other cameras that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to be showing you a side-by-side comparison. And so one camera I'm going to be using is the EOS 1DX Mark II, which you can see here. That'll be one of the full frame options that we're going to be looking at. It's a relatively newer camera, and what we're also going to be looking at on the full frame side is the EOS R5. Of course, this is one that has gotten a lot of notoriety recently. It's just come out. It's a mirrorless full frame camera. And so both of those two are in the few $1,000s range. Then I want to take a step down from that and take a look at one of the APS-C options, which is this Canon Rebel EOS or the EOS Rebel T7, and like I said, it's an APS-C sensor, which I've discussed in previous videos, so that's kind of a step down from there. And then finally, Canon does offer a point and shoot option. So this is the PowerShot G7X Mark III, which is the cheapest available, and also perhaps just as good as all the others, at least in terms of what you're going to be doing for your video. Now, Canon does offer a few, I think 3 different point and shoot cameras. This is the one that comes with that f2.8. Actually, this comes with a 1.8 to 2.8 lens. So of the point and shoot options on the EOS Webcam software, this is going to be the one to select if you want a point and shoot. And it has a 1-inch sensor, and we're going to be getting to that in just a moment. Now, what I have done is I have set all of the cameras to be equal in terms of white balance, the shutter speed, and the aperture. They're all set to 2.8. And then I've also got them all equivalent in terms of the frame rate, the compression. So I'm shooting all these at full HD, the 30 frames per second. This is the settings that I recommended in previous videos for the Zoom software. Now, the only difference between this video and the previous ones in the series is I'm not actually using the Zoom software to record this video. And the reason for that is that I did notice that there were some recording issues in terms of the quality of the recording versus what is actually seen in the Zoom software. And so I'm using a different software today so that you can clearly see the differences, if any, between the different camera options. And so, of course, what we're starting off with here today is the EOS 5D Mark IV. That's going to be our baseline. It's a full frame camera. I've got that attached to a 16 to 35 millimeter 2.8 lens. For the cameras that I showed to you earlier, the EOS 1DX Mark II, the EOS R5, These cameras are interchangeable, can take a interchangeable lens. And so I'm going to be using the same lens on these cameras. They're full frame, so there's not going to be any adjustment needing to be made. I'm also going to be using the same lens on the APS-C option. And you'll remember from the previous videos that this will multiply the focal length by 1.6. So when I get to using this camera, I will adjust the zoom on the lens to accommodate that. Of course, for the APS-C camera, you could buy a devoted APS-C lens, as I've discussed in previous videos. But for now, I just wanted to keep the lens the same from camera to camera. And then, of course, finally, for the point and shoot, for the PowerShot, I'm going to be using just the native lens that's built into that. And I can show you what that looks like just by turning that on. So that lens does come out like that. That's the one I'll be using for making this video comparison. Of course, when it comes to the webcam on the laptop, there's not really a whole lot that I can do in terms of setting the settings that I mentioned about on the camera. So I can't really control the ISO. I can't control the white balance. There's a lot of things I can't control. So what I'm going to do in terms of using the Zoom software, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be showing you the webcam exactly as it would appear if you were to use it for your Zoom interview. And so let's start there. Okay, and so here I've got the webcam. As you can see, the picture is pretty grainy, but this is more or less how I would have it set up for Zoom. I've got myself squarely in the middle of the picture. I'm relatively close to the camera. I could maybe try to move it down a little bit, but this is pretty much what it would look like for the when it's connected on Zoom. And so this gives you an idea of what using just your webcam on your laptop will look like. And so now let's move to the next camera option, which is going to be the EOS 1DX Mark II. So let me get that set up for you and show you what that looks like. Okay, and so here I've got the next camera on the list, the EOS 1DX Mark II. This camera sits a little higher on the tripod because of that extra portion on the bottom. It's a taller body, and so it is elevated a little bit. I've adjusted my seat level to accommodate that. And of course, I got the same lens on there, the same settings as the 5D Mark IV. And so this is the EOS 1DX Mark II for you to get a sense of the video quality compared to the other options. And now let me move on to the EOS R5. Okay, now I've got the EOS R5 set up, and that's the one that you're checking out here. One caveat about the EOS R5, of course, is that I'm using an EF lens on the new RF mount, and so I do have that EF RF adapter to accommodate that. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you're not planning to use the EOS R5, don't worry about it. But if you are looking to use the EOS R5, just keep in mind that it does have a different mount. So you're either going to want to get an RF lens for it, or you're going to want to use an EF lens, as I'm doing here with the EF RF adapter. Of course, you'll be able to see the side-by-side comparison in terms of the quality to let you know if this is an option that you want to go for when setting up for your interviews. And now for the next camera on the list, the EOS Rebel T7. Okay, and here we have the EOS Rebel T7. I am sure you can notice one issue that we have with this right away, which is that the picture is out of focus. I have been spending a lot of time on this and trying to figure out how to get the autofocus to correctly focus on my face, and it just wasn't working. There's also some other caveats to the EOS Rebel T7 that I wanted to mention, which is on the ISO settings, where that's where you can fine-tune how bright the video is. There's much fewer options. It goes from 800 to 1600 to 3200 to 6400. So if you choose to go with this camera, you're going to have some difficulty fine-tuning that. You just won't be able to. Something else to keep in mind is that it took me forever to figure out how to set the f-stop on the video. The default was at 5.6 and I wanted to get it to 2.8, and it required hitting a combination of buttons that was not at all intuitive to me. So if you've already got the EOS Rebel T7 and you want to find a way to make it work, go for that. If you want to. But from what I've seen, compared to some of the other options that are available, this is not a camera that I would recommend. Let me now go to the final option, which is the PowerShot. Okay, and here we have the final camera option, which is the PowerShot G7X Mark III. Now this is an interesting camera. In terms of being able to get the camera body plus a lens, this is among the cheaper options. And I'll be going in a moment through the price list and talking about kind of, what budgets can get you which cameras. But before I do that, I wanted to mention a couple of caveats about the PowerShot camera. So one is that actually its f-stop can go even lower than 2.8. And so that can be a really great option for you, especially if you don't have a lot of great lighting around you. You can take advantage of that opportunity to give you improved lighting without sacrificing the resolution quality, as I discussed in a previous video. The other thing that I want to get into, and I'll get into this again when we look at the price list, is that this is the only camera among the options that I've presented today that does not come with an available AC adapter. Now, where that may become an issue is if you're anticipating to do a longer series of video interviews, because keep in mind that while the camera is running, the one that you're using for your webcam, it's got to get power somewhere. So it's either going to be a battery or it's going to be plugging into an AC adapter if your camera comes with that option. All the other cameras that I presented today come with the AC option. This one does not. And so the next step is going to be to compare the videos side by side, and also to look at the pricing list that we've put together for you to see which option is going to be the best one for you. Before I get into that, I did just want to circle back to the segment on the Rebel T7 that I did earlier, and specifically the frustration I expressed in the camera not automatically focusing while the camera was taking the video or streaming the video. Now, what I expressed then was the frustration that perhaps you might feel if you get the Rebel T7 or you have the Rebel T7 and you set it up and you find that it's just not automatically focusing. Now, this is actually a feature of not just the Rebel T7, but a few of the cameras on the list that are compatible with the EOS Webcam software. And when I go over that list, I'll show you how I've identified those for you. But not to worry, if you have one of those cameras or you want to use one of those cameras, you can certainly do so. And the way to do that is you actually set up the focus ahead of time before the video starts streaming. And that's exactly what I've done here. This section or this segment of the video is actually being filmed on the Rebel T7. This time though, with the focus set before the filming started. And the way to do that is you can either use the autofocus. And so the autofocus works by setting the focus before you start it. So you can just use the shutter button to set the focus. And then once that focus is set, the camera will maintain that focus while the video is filming. Or you can use the manual focus on the lens. You can just turn the ring and you can get it to come in and out until it is set to the focus that you want. And as you can see, even though the camera is not focusing continuously, I am staying in focus. And the way that I'm doing that is that I'm not moving, too far forward or too far back. I'm staying more or less in the same position, which is pretty much what you would do while you are interviewing. And so as long as you're doing that, you're not really moving around a whole lot. You're not trying to hold something up in front of the camera for the person to see. If you're keeping everything more or less in the same plane, if you will, or the same distance from the camera, you're going to be fine. However, I did want to mention two additional caveats with regard to the Rebel T7 that I did not mention earlier that are important to consider, not only for this camera, but potentially other cameras in the Rebel lineup and maybe other ones that you would be looking to use. And the first of those is setting the custom white balance. Unlike all the other cameras that I'm testing for this video, where I could go into the menu settings or the camera settings and just plug in the number that I wanted or select the number that I wanted for the white balance, that is not available on the Rebel T7. The way to set the white balance is a rather complicated process, in my opinion, where you take something white, like a sheet of white paper, you hold it where you are going to be positioned. So in this case, I stood up from my chair, I put the paper where my face is, then you take a picture with the camera of the white object or piece of paper, and then you go into the camera's menu where it says custom white balance, and you have it use that photo to automatically determine what the white balance should be according to that photo. Even then, you can't set the white balance manually. You have to use the camera's automatic adjustment for automatic determination of it, but at least you can get it something closer than if you just use the camera's default setting. This brings me to the second caveat, which is that for the Rebel T7 and likely other cameras in the Rebel lineup, the video will not actually start, the camera cannot start recording a video, and of course that means streaming as well, unless there's a memory card in the camera. All the other cameras that I tested today work just fine. They can do the video streaming without a memory card being in the camera. But the Rebel T7 video function will not start without a memory card in the camera. But not only that, for the white balance, to be able to take a picture and have the camera set the white balance correctly, you need to have a memory card for the camera to be able to take a picture. It stores the picture on the memory card and then loads that to the white balance function to set the white balance correctly. So overall, even though the Rebel T7 could certainly work for your needs, and as you can see right here, I'm filming with it, it is just an unnecessarily, in my opinion, unnecessarily complicated camera to use for that purpose. So here I've got the camera and battery price lists for virtual video interviews for January 2021. In the description down below, you'll see a link for downloading the PDF. You can download it to follow along. In the PDF, you're going to notice that I've got, there are certain items that are, certain prices that are underlined. What these are, if you actually click on it, this will take you through to the website where you could purchase the item, for example, new or used camera, and then of course the batteries as well, for the price listed. And of course, these prices are updated as of January 2021. As time goes by, prices will change. The cameras available to use with the EOS Webcam software will change. More will be added. I'm not necessarily intending to update this list every month or every time that there's a new pricing or a new item added to the list. Really what I want to do here is kind of take you through what are currently the available options and really kind of take you through the process of considering them so that as new items are added or the prices change, you can know how to evaluate them appropriately. And so let's jump into the list and start off with how I've got this organized. So the first item, the first method of triaging the list is that I've sorted it by continuous autofocus. And so you'll remember earlier in the videos that I talked about this feature, particularly when discussing the Rebel T7 and its inability to focus while the camera is filming. All the other cameras were able to do this, but not that one. And so that's what's indicated here. So every camera that's marked yes has the ability to focus continually while the video is filming. And so I've got that. First are all the cameras that do have that feature, and then after are all the cameras that do not have that feature. Okay, and then the next category that I sorted by within the autofocus is the sensor size. And so first I've got the full frame options, Then I've got the APS-C options, which is first for those with continuous autofocus, and then APS-C. Well, I have the 1-inch PowerShot for the continuous autofocus. The full frame is followed by the APS-C, and then again here for the ones that do not have the continuous autofocus. Finally, I sorted each group of sensor size within each autofocus category by price from highest to lowest. And then I highlighted the cheapest option within each selection. And so, and I'll come back to that in a moment. What you're going to see here are in the pricing area for cameras is you'll see a new price and a used price. Now, if you don't see a used price, if you see N/A for used price, that means that the camera is so new that either there's no used cameras on the market, it just hasn't had any time for used cameras to hit the market, or the price of the used camera is essentially the same as what you would pay for a new camera. I mean, you go on to eBay, if you happen to find a used EOS R5, it's going to be more or less the same price as a new EOS R5, just because there hasn't been enough time for it to be used significantly and lose any value. On the flip side, if you see that there's a camera and there's no new price listed, there's only a used price listed, that means that the camera is discontinued, or for some other reason, no new cameras are available for that model, and so those can only be found in the used option. Getting over to the battery section of the list, I have here, of course, the battery type, but I put the price for the Canon version of the battery and then the third-party battery. Basically, what you're looking at there is that the third-party battery will work just fine in terms of delivering the same amount of power as the Canon battery. But you may find certain other items that are not compatible with the third party battery. A common example of this is that a lot of times when using a third-party battery, you've got that in your camera, the display that shows how much battery life is left either does not work properly or does not work at all. And so you would kind of have to be in a little bit of a guessing game as to how much battery life you have left. Now, in general, in my tests, I found that the batteries would last about an hour to 2 hours, depending on the battery, depending on the camera, which is something important to keep in mind, because in this third column here of pricing, I've got the one for the AC adapter. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you've got a short interview, one that's lasting less than an hour, no problem just going with the battery power. But if you've got a longer interview, and this happens, for example, in medical residency, you may want to look into the cameras that have the AC adapter option and get that. And what that allows for you to do, you put that in your camera in place of the battery, you plug it into the outlet, and then you're good to go. I mean, that's going to last as long as your electricity is running. Keep in mind that when you're using your camera, it is using power to function even as a webcam. And so whether you're getting that power from a battery or from the AC adapter, that's a decision for you to make. Now, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, there is even if you have a longer interview that's lasting a few hours, a lot of times there's breaks that happen along the way. And so you would certainly be able to swap out batteries during the course of the interview. So let's say, for example, you're interviewing for residency, you meet with the program director, and then you have a 5-minute break before meeting with the chief resident or interviewing with the chief resident, then that's certainly plenty of time to swap out the battery. And so what you would do is you would start off with what I recommend here is 3 batteries if you're going to do that. You start off with all 3 batteries charged up, make sure they're charged before the first interview. You put the first one in the camera. And then as you go through the interviews, you find a break to where you can swap it out and put the next one in. And then as you're using the next one, the first one will charge, and then you can go to the third one and then kind of just rotate them. And like that, you shouldn't have any problem to get through a 4, 5, or 6 hour interview process, especially one that has, you know, maybe like a lunch break in there or something like that. So definitely don't be afraid of going for the 3 batteries instead of the AC adapter. Now, in most cases, of course, if you see on the pricing, going for the AC adapter is going to be cheaper than getting 3 batteries. But there is one camera that I'm going to come back to in a moment where that's not the case. So like I said, we've got these triaged by, you've got the full frame and the APS-C. We're going to do a side-by-side comparison in just a moment with the different cameras that I use to see if really there is a difference among the full frame options and between the full frame and the APS-C option. If you find that full frame, that you want to go for full frame and that's the option you want, the cheapest there is this EOS RP. Now keep in mind when you're looking at the prices for all of these cameras except for the PowerShot, this is just the price for the camera plus either the batteries or the AC adapter. Now this 1 battery price assumes that the camera that you buy comes with 1 battery. So this would be adding on the price of additional batteries, and this would be adding on the price of the AC adapter. Because these are interchangeable lens cameras and these prices are for the camera plus battery only or camera plus AC adapter only, you're going to need to factor in when considering these prices that you would need to buy a lens as well. And that would start maybe around $200 to $300 depending on which camera you're getting, and it may be more expensive. Now, of course, you know, if you're getting, you know, you'll have to make sure that the lens you're getting is compatible with the camera that you get. So for example, in the EOS R series, which is EOS RP, EOS R, R5, R6, those are mirrorless cameras. If you're going to use an EF lens, which is the most common lens as of the filming of this video, that's directly compatible with these other EOS options here, you're going to need to get a converter, and that converter could cost $100 to $200, so it may actually take it up into the price range of like the EOS 5DS R. So keep in mind that there are some additional costs potentially depending on which camera you get. Speaking of converters, that also is the case with what I have here marked, the EOS M cameras, the ones that are in gold. I put those in gold because those use an M mount, the EF M mount, and there are very few lenses available, native lenses for that mount from Canon, and that is a mount that's being retired and it's going to be antiquated. So I put those in gold because I strongly discourage you to look into that. If you end up getting one of the EOS M cameras, then you're likely going to need to get an EF M to EF converter to be able to use an EF lens. That could end up being really complicated. And so that's why for the APS-C cameras with the continuous autofocus, I did not highlight the EOS M200. Even though that is the cheapest option, technically, you're likely going to find it causes you more headaches and additional cost than what's seen here. So I did highlight the EOS 70D as the cheapest option for that combination of continuous autofocus and the APS-C sensor size. Now I'm going to come back to the PowerShot G7 in just a moment. Let me finish going through the list here, and then I'll come back to that. Next, of course, we get into the cameras that do not have a continuous autofocus. We've got the first of those is the full frame. The EOS 60 is the cheapest among those. Now the EOS 60 is a great camera. It's one that I used to use personally for many years. Again, as you'll see, as you've seen in the Rebel T7 segment, when I came back and did the manual focus, ultimately this continuous autofocus may not matter to you. You know, you're likely going to be just fine without the continuous autofocus. And if that's the case, and you're comparing the continuous autofocus to the ones without the continuous autofocus, this is a great way to save money. I mean, you're looking at $513 here for the EOS 6D. The full frame equivalent over here, the EOS 5DSR or RP, you're looking at $1,000. So you're saving $500 just right there. And in my opinion, that could likely be worth it if you're not moving a lot in the video, which most people are not going to be doing. This could be just fine for you. What could also be fine is going to the APS-C sensor size without continuous autofocus. Though here, this list is populated by a lot of these Rebel models. And as you saw, when I used the Rebel T7, it was really challenging to use. And there are two additional caveats that I wanted to add to what I have already mentioned about the Rebel series, which is that setting the white balance is very difficult. Well, in the sense that unlike any of the other cameras that I tested, there's no option to go into the white balance and set a particular number in terms of what you want. The way you do that, the way you set the custom white balance with the Rebel is you actually hold up, or the Rebel T7, you hold up a piece of white paper where you would be. So I got up from the chair, held a piece of paper, you put the camera into manual focus so it's not trying to do the autofocus on a blank sheet of paper, and you take a picture. And then you go into the menu, you find the custom white balance function, and you have it analyze that picture of the white piece of paper. Then it will determine what the white balance setting should be. It may get it right, it may not. You're locked into whatever it chooses because, again, you can't manually set it. That's your option for setting the white balance, is to take a picture of something white, like a piece of paper. Of course, that brings us to the second caveat. Unlike any of the other cameras that I tested, the Rebel T7 required a memory card to be used even for the camera to start filming. The video function does not work without a memory card in the camera. All the other cameras, you could get them without a memory card and they would work just fine, but not so for the Rebel T7. And of course, you would also need the memory card to be able to take the picture of the white piece of paper to set the white balance. The Rebel cameras and these hoops that you would have to jump through are likely a good option if you are just wanting to pay the least possible. Of course, you'd have to go through more hoops in terms of getting the ISO right, the white balance right, the f-stop right. But if you look over here, the EOS Rebel T5 at a price of $139 is the cheapest one on here. And so if you get that $139 and you're paying $200 for a lens, that's the cheapest combination that you're going to be able to find here. Now, in terms of ease of use though, because of course, like I said, you've got to have the camera, then you've got to get the memory card, then you've got to get the lens. In terms of ease of use, the PowerShot G7X Mark III blows the rest of these out of the way, in the sense that this camera, it's on the more expensive side at $630 relative to the really cheap Rebel, but it comes already with a lens built in, and the lens, as we'll see in the side-by-side, works very well. It also comes with that very shallow f-stop. It actually starts lower than 2.8, unlike the lenses that are going to be available for these other cameras. And so for $630 all in, you have a really great option. It includes the continuous autofocus, setting the white balance, the ISO, the f-stop. All of that's really intuitive, really easy to do. You really just get it and kind of plug it in and you're pretty much good to go. The only caveat with this camera is that it does not come with the AC adapter. There's no AC adapter available for it. And so you would need to get a few batteries and use that option. Among all the cameras on this list, one to get for if you don't already own one of these cameras and you're going to get one, I would definitely recommend the PowerShot G7X Mark III. And we'll be seeing the side-by-side comparisons in a moment to really help show what the difference between that camera is versus the other ones and what you really are getting for these different price points. One other caveat I wanted to mention about this list is I did not test this camera right here, the EOS RA. The reason for that, I just automatically excluded it. I mean, I kept it on the list, but I put a line through it. This camera is a specialized camera for astronomers. It's really designed for taking pictures of stars and planets at night. It is not really intended for doing a video like what we are talking about doing here for the interviews. At the end of the list, you'll see footnotes with regard to some of the items that I have mentioned above. When I have this note that says, I mean, some of this stuff I've already talked about. This note here, when it talks about the cheapest new option comes with a kit lens. What that means is that when you're shopping for that camera, I couldn't find that you're able to buy the camera new without a lens automatically coming with it. Of course, the lens that automatically comes with it is not the desirable one to use for the interviews. It could be used, but you would likely be wanting to change that lens for a different one. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that. And of course, that's the same here. Cheapest option comes with a kit lens. A kit lens is basically a cheap lens that the camera manufacturers package together with the camera body so that when people buy it, they already have a lens they can start using. And of course, comes with the built-in lens. That refers only to the PowerShot G7X Mark III. So now that you've got all of the pricing here, let's do a side-by-side comparison to see really does it make a difference to pay thousands of dollars versus just a few hundred for the purposes of the virtual video interview. So now that we've had a chance to look at the price list, let's do a side-by-side comparison of the cameras that we've been testing to see if it's really worth paying $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 or more dollars versus just a few $100s to get the look that you want for your virtual video interview. So to start off with, let's do a side-by-side comparison of the full frame cameras. So for this comparison, what I have done is I have taken the videos that we've seen earlier and I've removed the audio and I've put them all together here so we can look at them side by side to see, do we really notice a difference from one to the other? So actually we do notice a difference right away, which is right here with the EOS 1DX Mark II, and that is in the form of this black border that goes around the video. As it happens, that border comes from the fact that at the video settings that we decided would be best for the interview, the EOS 1DX Mark II actually crops the image. And what that means, it actually removes this portion of the video feed around the image. It's not zooming in, it's not zooming out, it's just leaving out that portion of the video, as you can see compared to the other two feeds. I find that particularly annoying, especially because this is a camera that costs a few $1,000s. If you're going to be paying that much money, I think you should be getting a better video feed than this to get the most out of the lens and the setup that you're using. Something else that you want to look at, how clear is the subject in each of those videos? How sharply is the subject in focus? I guess you might say that the EOS R5 has a slightly better advantage over the other two, but they all three look pretty comparable. They look really great, especially compared to the laptop, which is basically what we're looking to improve over. Any one of these is going to do just fine. You see there's a slight difference in the background, that this is a little, has some deeper shadows on the EOS 5D Mark IV compared to the other two, and then there's some slight nuances among the three. Those are nothing. That's not anything to worry about or be concerned about. Again, it's very similar concept is in the for some reason the amount of blur of the background is different. This appears to be the blurriest, the 5D Mark IV, and then next is Mark II, the 1DX Mark II, and then finally is the EOS R5. Not really sure why that is, but again, you're not going to be having a side-by-side comparison for the video interview that you do. Any one of these, like all of these, have sufficient blur in the background. The subject is clearly in focus. Lighting looks great. Color looks great. You'd be good to go with any of these options. And so with that in mind, really, if you wanted to go full frame, you can expect that you're not going to see any difference among the different full frame cameras. And so you might recall that on the price list, I identified the EOS RP as being the cheapest full frame option, or the 5DS-R, because you don't have to get the converter for it. The cheapest option to use with continuous autofocus, and even a few $100s cheaper than that, the 6D. You can expect the same video quality on either of those that you see here. And so no reason to spend, on the higher end of the price range for a full frame camera. The low end is going to work just fine. And then that brings us to the next question. Do you even need to get a full frame camera? And so in the next comparison, what we're going to do, I'll take the EOS 5D Mark IV and I'll compare it to the APS-C camera that we used, the Rebel T7, and the PowerShot G7X to see, does it really matter to get a full frame camera? And so now let me bring up the next comparison, which is, of course, the full frame EOS 5D Mark IV versus the PowerShot G7X Mark III and the APS-C Rebel T7. There's a couple items I want you to see. Of course, you can tell right away that the white balance and the exposure are not the same among all three of these. So the 5D Mark IV comes across as the darkest, followed by the Rebel T7, followed by the PowerShot G7X Mark III. And then with regard to the white balance, the EOS 5D Mark IV comes across as the warmest, followed by the Rebel T7, followed finally by the PowerShot G7X Mark III. In terms of the actual exposure and the brightness of the video, that's really not an issue. These cameras handled them slightly differently, but if you were using one of these cameras for your video, you would simply set the ISO according to the level that you wanted, with one exception. That is the Rebel T7 and likely some of the other Rebel cameras along with it, which is that remember that for the ISO on this camera, you have much fewer options. You go from, for example, ISO 800 and you jump all the way up to 1600, and then you jump all the way up to 3200. All the other cameras have smaller increments to allow you to fine tune that brightness. And so if you were using the Rebel T7 in this setting, you might look at it and you say, okay, well, it's a little on the bright side. It's not too bright, but it's a little brighter than I would want it. If you go down to the next setting, then it would be too dark. So that's where the Rebel T7 falls short. The PowerShot G7X Mark III in this comparison does come across as a lot brighter than the other two. If I had wanted to do so, I could have just changed the ISO setting on that and brought that that picture a little darker to put it in line with the others. I didn't do that because I just wanted to leave the settings as they had to compare. But again, like that adjustment is really easy to make on the PowerShot G7X Mark III. And then as for the white balance, the Rebel T7 actually looks, in terms of some of the items, like the dog on the shelf in the background is supposed to be white, and that looks white. If you compare that to the EOS 5D Mark IV, the dog in the background looks a little on the warmer side, but in the EOS 5D Mark IV, the skin tone comes across a little better. Again, on the Rebel T7, you don't have any control over that. You have to take a picture with a white piece of paper and hope the camera gets it right. So when I look at the 5D Mark IV versus the Rebel T7, I would go for the 5D Mark IV just in terms of the white balance, just because I know that I can get the skin color to look a lot better and not so kind of washed out, if you will, compared to the Rebel T7. With regard to the PowerShot G7X Mark III, you can change the white balance. You can go in there and make that setting exactly as you want it. And just to prove that point, I'm going to do that here right now. And here we have it, the PowerShot G7X Mark III with the, actually on this one, I took the f-stop all the way down to its minimum value of 1.8. I got the ISO set correctly for this camera, which turned out to be ISO 320 for that f-stop setting, as opposed to what I had just been using, which was 1250. And I got the white balance set correctly. And here you can see this video looks absolutely great. No difference between the PowerShot video and the other video, the other cameras, the APS-C sensor and the full frame sensor for the purposes of a virtual video interview. So what does that tell you? You don't need to go out and spend the big bucks to get a really great solution. And so as the final step in this comparison, I'm going to put this side by side with the laptop video so that you can take a look at that. And so here we have it, the PowerShot G7X, the clear winner of the comparison among the different cameras for your virtual video interview. Here you can see I'm filming with the PowerShot G7X on one side, and on the other side, the video feed from the laptop webcam that I took earlier, of course with the sound removed so that you can see side by side the two options. The PowerShot G7X Mark III, clearly a much better option than the laptop webcam, and as mentioned earlier, really a great affordable option for you. Only caveat being, make sure to buy a couple of extra batteries so you can cycle through those during your interview. And there you have it. The PowerShot G7X Mark III is by far the greatest option for your virtual video interview, any streaming that you want to do. And actually, I'd like to make a correction to something that I've just mentioned, and actually I've mentioned earlier in the video as well, which is since filming those earlier segments, we did discover that in fact there is a AC adapter available for the PowerShot G7X. We've modified our price list so that when you download the PDF, you can have the link there, which takes away the one issue that you might perhaps have had with using the Canon PowerShot G7X for your interviews. So with that, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Please head over to www.dlaeditors.com. We offer a full range of editing and proofreading, consultation and critique services for everything ranging from master's, PhD theses and dissertations to journal articles, marketing materials, personal statements, CVs, resumes. If you name it, if it's not poetry, we will help you with it. And with that, make sure to like and share the video, and we will see you soon at www.dlaeditors.com.